G'day ladies and gents, and welcome back to the channel, and welcome to Victory at Sea Pacific. Victory at Sea Pacific is a new RTS game under development by Evil Twin Artworks. The game is still under development and is due for release this year. That being said, there may be the odd bug that pops up during the course of this video, and it is worth noting that all of the artwork is not finalised at this time. There is still work being done. Alright, so that out of the way. What is it? Well, as I mentioned, it's an RTS. It's almost borderline a grand strategy, but I wouldn't say it's quite there. It does have a rather unique feel, however. The idea is that you are the commander of the Pacific Fleet in the defense of the United States in World War II. If you play right from the start of the tutorial, the game starts right at the moment that Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. Once the tutorial is complete, it leaves you about 3 weeks to a month after that attack in full command of the Pacific and very much on the defensive, with the appropriate ships and fleets that were available to US forces following the attack on Pearl Harbor. Now, as you can see from the video footage I have running in the background at the moment, you don't just command the defense of the Pacific from the grand strategy map. You can in fact zoom all the way down to commanding individual ships and even ordering the firing of individual guns on individual ships, should you wish to. The AI will play out battles if you want. I have honestly, at this point in development, found the AI to be rather hit and miss. Sometimes they are tactical geniuses, and other times the AI simply sails directly into the guns of opposing ships and simply dies. But it is an option. Now, there are no missions, so to speak, within the game, as in the battles are not instanced out of the main game. The entire game is still playing in real time, so while you are on the tactical map directly controlling ships and issuing orders to units, as I am here trying to get these tugboats, which are the only defense I have of Midway at this point, out of position. 2 Japanese destroyers are incoming, and these tugs have absolutely no chance against them, but Midway is defended by its own coastal defences and does have a stationed air force with anti-shipping and anti-submarine warfare assets, which are being deployed right now. But I'll get to those in just a moment. While I'm directly controlling these assets on the tactical map, all assets across the entirety of the Pacific, both Commonwealth, which I'll come to in a moment, US and Japanese forces, are still moving, they are still issuing their own orders, they are still attacking or setting up ambushes. And it is entirely possible that in the thick of a campaign, you could be directly leading a battle here on a tactical map, and suddenly get a notification that a second attack is started somewhere else across the Pacific, which could leave you in a situation where you'll either have to let the AI manage one of those battles on its own, or you will have to jump back and forth between directly controlling 2 different battles in 2 different locations at the same time. Now, as you play the game, you will of course control all the different manner of ships, everything from destroyers to cruisers to aircraft carriers directly, but you can also control submarines, and as you can see, directly control air assets, any aircraft deployed from carriers or deployed from land-based runways that are under your control. You can directly take control of those aircraft and issue orders to them, down to controlling the spread of the torpedoes and the formations of the fighters as they're functioning. And we had a small little bug here. For some reason, these dive bombers really did not want to land, or reload or rearm. They just wanted to circle at the end of the runway, which was a little bit odd, but still in development, stuff like this will happen. Now, in grand strategy terms, all the bases across the Pacific have a certain level of supplies. These supplies could be rations, fuel, bombs, bullets, you name it. Everything that you would need in order to manage the defense of the Pacific. However, they do not have an infinite supply. These bases also do not self-produce, so they require logistics trains coming from the mainland United States in order to continually resupply them in order to keep them functional. Now, this is actually one of the interesting parts of the game. You don't directly control the logistics fleets. The AI automatically works out which bases are in the most urgent need of supply and will control fleets in order to go to these places and resupply them. However, you are in control of all of the resources across the entirety of the Pacific, so you choose whether or not to spend those resources in the construction of new warships, or whether or not to spend those resources in the construction of logistics vessels. Now, this does require a little bit of management on its own, because these logistics vessels do exist on the map and can be attacked by Japanese forces and be sunk. So while having more transport ships moving more goods to more bases, continually keeping everything supplied, is definitely better, you will also have to defend these fleets, so you'll have to put more of your wartime assets into making sure these fleets don't get sunk. Or alternatively, you could choose just to leave the fleets undefended and hope the Japanese don't sink them. But my experience with the game is the Japanese will sink them. The enemy AI, while it can also be rather interesting in the way it fights on the tactical map, on the grand strategy map it can put together some pretty interesting attacks of its own. Now here I'm going to take direct control of a TBD Devastator flight to deploy against these destroyers. Now one of the destroyers has already been sunk, we have one destroyer remaining. This is going to be a very bad torpedo drop. I'm going directly down the nose of the destroyer, it's a big mistake. Now I could control these aircraft and tell them to fly offside and drop from the side. I could also adjust the torpedo spread. However, I didn't. So these torpedoes aren't going to hit, but it gives you an idea on exactly how detailed you can get with these. Now the flight models for the aircraft themselves, or at least the physical models for the aircraft and how they look, isn't quite perfect, but it's good enough for this type of game. I don't really have any complaints at this time, and as it was said before, the artworks are still in development and likely will improve. I will say that there is an odd blurring effect, I guess is the best way to put it, that appears over the aircraft when you zoom in too close. I assume that the developers have put that in order to hide the fine details, so when you get too close to the aircraft, so you can see an example of it there, you can't see any of the issues with the design. I don't particularly like that. I'd like to see it out. Even if the aircraft model isn't perfect, that's fine. I don't particularly like the blurring effect that they have put on. I mean, it is just personal preference, but yeah, I'd rather that not be there, or be an option to disable for those that are not interested in having it. They still haven't worked out how to land. Now there are some other very cool details on how the ships work. Here we see the USS Enterprise. Now I'm currently trying to deploy a couple of squadrons of dive bombers for an attack. However, the Enterprise isn't turned into the wind. The disc at the base of the Enterprise that you can see on the ocean surface with a bunch of arrows that's just turned green is actually the wind direction. If you are sailing the fleet towards a location and then you issue a launch order for aircraft, the entire fleet will turn in order to allow Enterprise to turn into the wind, or whichever aircraft carrier you happen to have, to turn into the wind and allow for aircraft deployment. After the aircraft have deployed, the aircraft carrier will turn back into the original direction of travel, the fleet will line up around her, and she'll continue on her way. When those aircraft have completed their mission and return and they're coming in for landing, once again, the aircraft carrier will turn back into the wind in order to recover the aircraft. Once all of the aircraft have recovered, it will turn back onto direction, and it does so automatically. It's just a nice little touch. It's something that is generally not acknowledged in games like this, that the aircraft carriers need to be facing into the wind in order to deploy or recover aircraft, and it is good to see it here. And we jump back to Pearl Harbor, where a wolf pack of Japanese submarines, 5 submarines in total, have been detected just south of Pearl Harbor. So first things first, we're going to send out a bunch of Catalinas equipped for anti-submarine warfare to hit them as it is approaching nighttime, but Pearl Harbor does actually have some ships. I still do have what remains of the 1st Pacific Fleet is currently under repair in Pearl Harbor. I do have a number of destroyers equipped for anti-submarine warfare also stationed in the area, so they're going to be sent out as well, but it will take them time to get on station. So the Catalinas are going to go in first, we'll send in the destroyers second. Now, in addition to everything that I've just spoken about, we also do need to keep an eye on our individual ships. While the ships do just appear on the surface to be a health bar and nothing more, there are individual modules and crew complements for each ship. They're actually very similar to how World of Warships does its ships. Ships can take critical damage to key components, they can also lose crew members. Now, damage to key components, some of which cannot be repaired in the field, will require ships to return to port, not just for resupply, but also for an extended period in dry dock in order to actually repair them. But on top of that, if you are running a ship that has sustained large amounts of damage and potentially suffered large amounts of crew loss, the morale of that crew will drop over time. Now, ships do incur experience. The longer they're in the field and the better they perform, the better they will get at everything that they do. So it is important, if you've got a ship in the field, to address that morale issue, as the lower morale, while as far as I can tell ships won't try and defect or quit the battle or stop responding to orders, their efficiency will drop and their performance will drop as a result. You can adjust the morale and try and improve morale, obviously, by taking your ships back to port, getting them repaired, which will also lead into crew having time on shore and getting some shore leave. In the field, if you need to manage your morale without having access to a port, you can increase the number of rations. Now, your ships, though, have a limited supply as well. Handing out more rations will consume that resource faster on board your ships, requiring you to return to port to get serviced and resupplied at a much sooner date, but it will address the problem in the short term and keep the ship in the best fighting form that it can be. Now, the last thing to probably go over in this quick look is ship construction, research, and resource management. So this is the ship construction screen. You access it by going to any port that has access to a shipyard. Each shipyard can only build a certain number of ships at any given time. If you queue up more ships than your shipyard is able to handle, the extra ships will just join a production queue and will not begin construction until previous ships have been constructed and have cleared the construction base. The larger the ship, the longer it will take to construct. If you are building capital level ships, they will take an extremely long time to put together. It's very important that you do your best not to lose them because they are very hard to replace. They're both very expensive to build in resources and in time. Now, each ship is constructed individually, so you are not building groups of ships. If you want to build a fleet with 10 destroyers, you will need to build 10 destroyers. The resources for ship construction come from the number of ports you control. Each port you control, whether it has a shipyard or not, generates a certain amount of resources over a certain amount of time. The more ports you have control over, the more resources you will gain. The more ports you lose, the less resources you will gain. So this is how your performance within the campaign directly affects your resource production. You can think of the ports not only as defensive positions and resupply points, but also as control points in a more traditional RTS. Now, as for technological advancement, as you proceed through the campaign, Command will occasionally issue you missions. This may be to run a raid on a particular island, to intercept a particular fleet and destroy it, or engage it at the very least, so on and so forth. As you complete these missions, you will over time gain access to more advanced ship hulls and larger capital ships that you will be able to construct. This also leads to a very high risk, high reward system in the earlier part of the campaign, as a lot of the major ships that you will be relying on, ships such as the Enterprise and your other aircraft carriers, plus the small number of battleships that did manage to survive the attack on Pearl, at least well enough to be repaired and put back into service, well, you can't replace these in the early game. You do not have access to either the resources nor access to even the blueprints that are required in order to construct them. So these become incredibly valuable vessels that must be defended and you can't really afford to risk. Which leads on to one of the last and most interesting mechanics within the game. You can't blind attack seaports. Before you can even initiate a raid, you're going to have to find out what the defenses and the facilities are on the port that you're wishing to attack. Now, you can do this in a number of ways. You can send a recon aircraft to recon the area. You can send a surface ship in to study. Both of those come with risks of their own. Obviously, the aircraft could encounter the anti-aircraft defenses of the island. Likewise, a ship could be attacked by the shoreline defenses. The most reliable way I've found is actually sending in a submarine. Not just good for harassing enemy convoys, the submarines can close into an island while submerged, pop the periscope and do a little bit of a study of the surface of the island, which you yourself do directly by raising the periscope. Once a hostile port has been reconned, you can then initiate a raid against it to start battering down its defenses and disabling its capabilities. Once you have battered down the defenses of the island enough, you can then initiate an invasion, which will come in the form of a generated surface fleet consisting of landing craft. Now, these landing fleets do not appear out of nowhere. They actually come from a port, and they exist in much the same way as your logistics fleets and your own surface fleets do, which means they can be attacked and destroyed by hostile Japanese forces if you are not careful. Now, the last thing I wanted to mention, which I mentioned much earlier on in this video, was Commonwealth forces. As it currently exists at this point in development, only the US naval campaign is available. However, a Japanese campaign and a British Commonwealth campaign will also be made available as well. While you are playing as the US, British Commonwealth forces do exist on the map. Now, you cannot directly control them, but they will be operating out of their own ports and running their own missions as well. Now, as the US, you can see British Commonwealth forces on the map, and you can indirectly assist them. You cannot take control of their vessels, but if they are in the middle of a battle and you have a fleet in the area, you can send your fleet in to assist their units. You will not be able to control their units, but you can control your own inside of their battle. Likewise, if you see them running an operation to attack an island, you could position your fleets in the area to intercept any potential reinforcements that Japan might send in, or to attack a nearby island in order to stretch Japan's resources in that particular area thin, increasing the chance that both the British Commonwealth forces and your own forces will actually succeed within the area. As I said, there is a hell of a lot going on in this game, and it is a hell of a lot of fun. It does need a little bit of polish. I have run into a few bugs across the way. At one point, I spawned into the tactical map and found a couple of my destroyers sailing through land, not far off the coast of Australia, so that was a little odd. We've seen the planes that refuse to land, and there's been a couple of other glitches here and there, but for the most part, the game is entirely playable. The artwork and assets do probably need a little bit of a polish up, but as I said, that is something that is happening. The UI, well, the UI isn't bad. It's not the prettiest UI that I've ever seen, but it is entirely functional. At no point did I ever run into a situation where I wasn't entirely sure where something that I was looking for is within the UI, and most of it is pretty straightforward. So for example, you can see my forces up on the left hand side. If I want to break this into different battle groups, or I want to break them into potentially different fleets, you simply drag them out of where they are to another point on the map and then release, and they'll automatically fall either a new unit group under a fleet or form an entirely new fleet depending on where you are and what you're doing. So yeah, overall, so far, I'm pretty impressed with what I've seen at this point. The game plays really well. The game can be quite difficult at some points. I did at first try and play the game on hard and immediately got my ass handed to me by Japan. At this point, I am currently playing on medium difficulty, and this would be my second campaign. My first campaign, I also lost the Pacific, but it was much easier to put forward a force. There is, of course, an easy difficulty, although I think I'll be sticking to medium for this one. And I'm looking forward to seeing the other campaigns, playing with the Japanese units and trying to run alternate history and take over the entire Pacific, or potentially do the unexpected and take over the British Commonwealth and see whether or not Great Britain can wind up controlling the entirety of the Pacific by the end of the war. Anyways, ladies and gents, I hope you enjoyed this quick look, and thank you very much for watching. I'll put a link for the Steam page for Victory at Sea Pacific in the video description down below for anyone who wants to check it out. As I said at the start of the video, the game is not currently released, and it is not running in early access either. It looks like the developers are going for a direct release to live, which I do have to give them credit for. That being said, you can still wishlist the game and keep an eye on its developments on Steam until it actually comes up to release. And let me know in the video description down below if you've liked what you've seen, and if you'd like to see me run a little bit of a campaign for the Pacific Theater as US forces here on the channel. Anyways guys, until next time, remember to click that like button, share and subscribe if you would like to see more, and as always, take care.